Hello and welcome to my SharePoint design and video blog. My name is Erik Swenson, and you can follow me on Twitter at Erik J. Swenson or on my blog ericswenson.blogspot.com. Today we're going to be talking about a very exciting topic, which is the SharePoint 2013 responsiveness and responsive design. What we're going to basically go over is how to one, understand what is responsive, and two, understand what you can do with it. Let's get started. One of the first things to note is that during these sessions, I will not be using any of the Twitter Bootstrap or the HTML5 boilerplate, CSS or HTML or anything like that. We're going to be using strictly just CSS 3 media queries and properties. So Twitter Bootstrap and Boilerplate are great resources. It's just at this point we're just talking about the basics. So one of the first steps that you want to do so that you have the full mobile experience on your mobile phones is to disable the mobile browser view. Basically in SharePoint 2013 there is a feature that is activated by default that allows your mobile phone to have a specific mobile view. And what this provides is a simple interface that you could view documents, you could search, you could do a variety of things, but it doesn't allow you to sort of provide your own responsive CSS for mobile-based applications or devices. So let's go through the steps of how to deactivate that. Here is a normal SharePoint 2013 team site. What we want to do is disable that feature. So go under Site Actions, Manage Site Features, and then scroll down to this mobile browser view, and then click Deactivate. And then deactivate this feature. And now what this did is basically when you view this site and this URL from a mobile device, it'll actually give you the full desktop view. The next step in this process is to create a CSS reference. So there's many different ways you could do that. So if you have publishing enabled in your site, you could actually create a alternate style sheet and reference that in your master page settings under Site Actions and Site Settings. You could create a master page in the master page gallery and use a link reference to that style sheet. You could also create a device channel in the Design Manager and have specific master pages for specific devices, which then ultimately point to certain style sheets. And the last very simple way is to just add an inline CSS or with using style tags directly onto the page. Now that's page specific and you wouldn't really do that for large implementations. So the next step is to understand media queries, and media queries are new to CSS3. So modern browsers like IE9 and above, Firefox, Safari, and Chrome, and almost pretty much all mobile browsers support CSS3. However, browsers like IE8 and below don't support CSS3 and therefore do not allow you to have responsive websites based on older browsers. So it's important to understand your users and understand whether they're on IE9 and above or what they're really using for browsers. We'll also talk about the different ways to use widths and orientations to target certain breaks, and we'll talk about that more. So this step number 4, content and users. You need to understand what type of content is being displayed on your site. So whether it's a fluid or liquid content, whether it expands the window as needed or whether you have a fixed width. And that's based on your base visual design of your site. How many columns of content is being displayed? Is there tabular data like tables that include a lot of lists that have a lot of columns? It's really important to understand that information so you can identify what are the breaks of information. So point number 2, identify breakpoints. So things like navigation and header and imagery. understand when you reduce the size of a window, at what point does the content become unreadable, and you need to adjust it so that the users are getting the best experience possible. So it's sort of, as the screen gets smaller, you're basically simplifying the design and reorganizing content as needed. And also understand your users. So understand, are they coming into the site with mobile phones, desktops, tablets? What are those different devices and sizes? So people could have different size resolutions of desktops, and you might want to target that based on those breaks. So that's the next main point. This next component is the app media. Within the CSS, you can use the app media to target specific things like screens or the print layout. And the most common is for responsive is the app media screen or app media only screen. And what this does is it says, if there is a content being viewed through a screen, therefore use this type. The next sort of component that we'll talk about is the max width versus min width. There's sort of debate of when do you use one versus the other. The min width is really, you're talking about mobile first, and you're talking about setting a design so that you're designing for mobile first, and then as the screens increase in size, you're adjusting or adding, or you have a base design with mobile first, and then you sort of adjust it and override those styles as the screen gets larger. The max width is basically saying, I'm going to start with a large design first, so large desktops, and then as the screen gets smaller, then you're going to override those larger CSS properties. The downfall to the max width is that when you get into the smaller screens, it's basically you're reading through all of the CSS that you have to override when you get down to the large one. So the benefit is with a min width, you're reducing the amount of CSS that gets read for those quick mobile views. So the performance is a lot better. So to target a device by max width, what you would do in your CSS file is basically have your app media only screen, and then have your max width in a certain amount. So it could be 320px, 1024. So this is basically saying that when a device hits a max width of 480, then therefore display everything up until 480 pixels. And again, this was something that you could use mainly more on desktops, and you can kind of sort of the large screen down. The other option you could have here is the max device width. And what that does is it's saying if the max device width is exactly 480 pixels, then use the style sheet. Now, that's not really that recommended because it's so restrictive. As many different browsers or devices have different resolutions, there's no way you can easily target specific devices or anything like that, or even if you wanted to, it'd be very hard to have that. So in only certain cases where you really want to get very, very specific on a very specific device would you use that device width in your CSS. So here's an example diagram that basically identifies when you use max width, what is really being called and referenced when you get down from a large screen down to a small screen. So at first, when you're viewing let's say a tablet or a larger website from a desktop, and you have a max width of 1024 pixels, basically this would be at the top of your style sheet. It's only reading the properties that are in this bracket here, and that's the only thing that's reading for that one larger screen. As soon as you hit the max width of 640 pixels, so something like a phone that's in landscape mode or something like that, it would read the max width of these properties, but then you have to override it with the properties in here. So as it starts cascading down, you'll see that when you get down to the very small screens here, you have to override every single one of these components to get your screen to, view. And, as you start building out really, really complex sort of media queries and different things like that, it becomes a point where, when you design from mobile first and very small screens up, sometimes with SharePoint, you want to hide certain things for the small screens, and it gets difficult to add them back in when you get into the larger screens. So that's where you sort of have to weigh in, do you go from the large screen and then sort of simplify and hide things, even though it's, going to take more, bandwidth to pull in and override all these styles. I think, as we start getting into it, it might actually be easier to build the CSS to hide and reduce certain things for the small screen, even though it's, pulling in all those other style references. So we'll talk more about the min width and the benefits there as well. So here's a sort of simple way to break it down. So for example, if we use max width of 1024, we had a body background of the color red. Basically, this larger screen has a background of red. As soon as you get down to a smaller screen, so this is going to be lower in the style sheet, you're basically overriding the red and making it blue. When you get down to the very bottom, basically you've had to override that it's red, it's blue, it's green, and now it's yellow. So these are sort of the things that you need to consider when you're doing your media queries and different, whether it's max width or min width. So now that we covered max width, let's cover min width here. So min width is used to specify when, like I said, for smaller screens first or mobile first, and it's most commonly used and recommended for most responsive projects. So things like Twitter Bootstrap and HTML5 boilerplate, they primarily use min width within a lot of their style sheets. So for that, basically, instead of using max width, you're basically specifying min. Here's an example how the min width component works. Basically, at the top of your style sheet, you would specify the lower min widths. And again, it's basically a flop of what the max width is. So for your smaller screens, you're only pulling in the styles for those min widths. And as you start getting larger in screen real estate, it's basically, you're going to be overriding that smaller screen style sheets. So for example, if I have a background color of red, which is for the small screen, you basically, as you get down into the larger screens, it's overriding those smaller CSS properties. So the next attribute that you could utilize within the CSS3 media queries is the orientation component. So you can set it as landscape or you can set it as portrait. And you'll notice that the min width here is the exact same for both of those, because in the device, it'll understand whether in its current state the width is larger than its height, therefore it would be landscape, and vice versa. If the height is larger than the width, it will use these properties. So this will be something where if you want to target a different break based on whether you're holding the phone sideways or vertical, you can have different styles based on that. So this is sort of looking at from a simple starter CSS. What you could do for responsive is basically say, I want a min width of 1024 in both landscape and portrait, and I want a min width of 480 in both landscape and portrait. And what that would look like is something like this. So you'd utilize the smaller min widths at the top, and then you would utilize the large ones on the bottom. Now, since the orientation is completely different between landscape and portrait, there is no, you don't have to override or worry about the cascade between landscape and portrait. One could be above the other. It really doesn't matter. So you really don't have to override for portrait, from landscape. So basically you could utilize this as your starter for just the very simple, if I was to view it from a phone or a tablet or a certain breaks on the site. This would be pretty simple to do. So the next step is to identify, what can you do with SharePoint in a responsive manner. So first, let's talk about the desktop view. So this is sort of a standard view of what you get straight through the desktop. When you view it from a tablet, say an iPad or some other device like that, the landscape mode, you pretty much get the same experience as a desktop. The portrait mode, you can see that from the viewport, you're actually sort of zooming out on the content, so it's not as readable, even though it kind of squishes everything in. Then when you get to the phone view, sort of the one on the left here is sort of what you get straight out of the box from that mobile feature, mobile view from SharePoint. As soon as you disable that feature, you'll see that you can get, this is from an iPhone 5, that you can get sort of the same experience that you get on the desktop. And again, it's just zoomed out. So the things are a lot smaller. It's harder to read. You could always zoom in if you wanted to. Also, with the iPhone, you have this ability of, from landscape mode, that you can click on this little icon and it'll basically expand it so it goes full screen. And I think the reason for that is that really with the browser sort of URL area and the tools on the bottom, there's really not a lot of space here vertically to really see much. So they allow you to sort of expand that out. So the first things that we can kind of look at for SharePoint 2013 from, sort of reducing the amount of content or functions and really focus on the content is possibly from a desktop view, from a tablet view, we remove the top ribbon, maybe we remove the left side navigation, and also move that content over. And what that would look like is something like this, where really you got your top header, you've got your content, and you go from there. From the phone, we might want to make it a little bit more dramatic. So we'll remove the top ribbon, we'll move the search to the top, we will move the left side navigation and actually change the layout and configuration of some of the content and change the background color. So what that would look like is something like this. It doesn't take a lot to get to this point. There is a significant amount of CSS to kind of hide things and change some layouts and make the navigation that's normally horizontal into a vertical format, stacked in sort of like these pills. But really, you get a good experience that you're simplifying it for the smaller screen real estate. So next, we're going to go into what does this really mean when you're actually building the CSS. All right, so let me explain sort of what I've done for this site. So for this basic team site, I've duplicated the Seattle master and created two style sheets. One is simple, one is custom. So let's look at the simple one here. We edit in advanced mode. Basically, I've just added a reference style sheet to this responsive CSS file in the site assets. All right, so this site assets has this simple responsive CSS. I'll open that up. It's actually right here. And you'll see that basically we have the same CSS that we talked about in the presentation. So when a screen has a min width of 480 pixels and is in the landscape orientation, the body background will be red. And when it's in a portrait, make it blue. When it goes to 1024 or larger, it'll have a landscape and background color of green. So what we need to do here is actually go into my master pages and enable this as a default master page and as the custom one. So when we do a refresh here, you'll see that now my site is green. And if I reduce the size here, all right, so basically once it hits 480 pixels, you have a vertical format, which is green, then a horizontal format, so when it's in landscape, when the height and width is, the width is larger than the height, it goes into red. So then when we go past that and you get into 1024, you'll notice it now goes to green. I don't have the ability to show the yellow, mainly because I don't have enough height here. But this sort of shows you that as you increase the size, you can both target the landscape and the portrait mode. So within this next step, what we're going to do is we're going to change it to the more complicated one. So we're going to right click on custom, set as default, set as custom. And what that's going to be doing is looking at this custom responsive CSS. So from here, this is basically, we're now utilizing the max width, and I'll show you how that sort of works. So from the top here, we have max width of 1024, and it's basically saying to hide the ribbon row. Then we get down to a smaller max width of 768 to hide the ribbon row, the top links, the left side navigation, and move the content area over. So let's see what that looks like. All right, so this is our normal desktop view, but when you hit a certain size, you'll notice that that top ribbon row now just got removed, and that's where it hit that 1024 max width. So then when we get down even smaller, you'll see at this point it's now going to remove both the left side navigation and the top header. All right, so then this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So for the max width of 480 with the orientation of portrait, there's basically we're going to set the background color to this blue color. We're going to remove the top logo, which is this logo up here. And we're also going to change the orientation of the search. And I'll send all of this information so that you guys can see it in a style sheet, so you can have that. But basically it's doing a lot of reorganizing, changing the format, changing, like for the navigation, I'm setting this to display block, setting the margins, making it float to the left. There's a variety of different things here, so you can kind of work through that. Also setting the background colors, the borders for the navigation. So what this is, then as we go down, setting the page title for a certain color, making it white, and then we get into the navigation and the content box. So the main content area is going to look a little bit different, and then a lot of this other stuff is sort of styling the news feed and some of the other components. So we'll set all the tables and all that stuff to white, and that is it. So when we go to a really small size, and right there, you'll see that it has a drastically different look and feel. So the news feed is actually stacking on top of the documents. We've got our page title here. You've got our logo, the search at the top. So this is more around what you would see from a mobile view. So you'll see the differences here. And this is really a starter. I mean, I went pretty custom with this mobile view, but you could reduce it down to doing a few different things, just reducing the amount of functionality so that you're really just getting to the main components within this mobile view. And once again, thank you for viewing my blog and my videos. And again, you can contact me at Twitter at Erik J. Swenson or on my blog, ericswenson.blogspot.com. Thanks.